Hi guys, welcome back to Combustion Junction and what looks to be episode 1 of the Honda 360 CB360 build. So for those who have followed along, you know that I traded this a couple months ago for a Honda Trail 70. A 70s Honda Trail 70 little mini dirt bike. If you want to see the story of that happening, I'll put a link up right here. But essentially, sort of to sum up what he was getting rid of was, I guess it was sort of a barn find. It wasn't, and I'll elaborate sort of on that in a little bit. But he had it, I'm assuming he was going to restore it from what he told me. He stripped a whole bunch of stuff off the bike, seat, carbs, exhaust, bunch of electrics, bunch of other crap, put everything in a box and was starting to like spray paint little parts of the frame and deal with little bits. He hadn't really picked up any new parts or anything. It was still a rolling chassis with an engine. And he had the box of stuff, whatever, set aside in his garage. He got called out of the country to go deal with a relative, ended up being out of the country for quite a while. And somehow, when he got back and went to sort of start reassembling the bike and continue on, that box of stuff went missing. So anything he had taken off and put in that box was absolutely gone. It took the wind out of his sails. He, you know, it was kind of one of those things in which he just didn't want to continue on the project, and I guess he wanted to, I guess his thing is a stock thing, which is why he was interested in the Trail 70 I had, because it was 95% all there. So with what was left, he was just looking to get rid of it, and he was looking to trade. So we made the deal, and it's actually kind of perfect for me because I want to customize this bike, and now I can do it free of any sort of guilt about, you know, not leaving it stock or cutting into the frame or anything, because half of it's gone anyway. So when I bought this bike, I honestly didn't, like, you know, I had my initial assessment of it. I knew the engine wasn't seized because I could kick it, but that's as far as I got, other than the initial look at it. Maybe airing up the tires, I don't even remember. I haven't done a lot to it. It went under a tarp until the 400 Cafe Racer project could be finished. So when I finally got it into the garage and was able to take a look, you start to notice all the little, you know, like there was no carbs, and that was obvious, and there was no speedo cluster and seat, and the big ones are there. But then you kind of get, you know, you do your initial sort of pre-prep for what we're doing now. Because I'll admit, I ain't no Musty One. And if you don't know who Musty One is, go check him out. Anyway, I wanted to do some background work before I got into actually putting it on camera, just so I had a little bit of an idea where I was going. And yeah, there's definitely some interesting things that I've discovered. So let's get this pointed there, and I'll let you sort of point out some of the things that I have and what I don't and what I figured out and where I'm gonna go with things. So let's do this. So here it is, pretty much as I got it. I'll explain what I've dug into in the meantime. Tank is okay. The finish is gone on the sides. It does have the decals. There is some pitting and some rusting here on the other side, which I won't show you because there's no light on it. There's a big dent here, which is probably the worst of it, and you know, some surface rusting or whatever. Inside, you know, it needs a sealing and needs to have some of the rust sort of shaken out of it. It has the fuel gauge cap, which still actually has the float in it. I'm not going to keep that. I'll just get something nice and clean and stock looking for that. No speedo cluster, no headlight, nothing else. It does have some of the controls that came with it. I've dug into it a little bit. They were actually the in-bar controls. I unhooked them and pulled them out, just trying to sort of make sense of some of the wiring. So they are both there. Those are both the stock ones. The starter button was actually broken. I have the other half somewhere else, and these wires were all clipped, so there's a little bit of configuring to do there. Like I said, no headlight. December of 74 build, so it's a 75. This model does come with the disc brakes as opposed to the drums. All the setup is there, except there's no caliper for the brakes. That has something to be acquired. Something I have mentioned in the other thing, I did get a line on some parts bikes, some CJ360s, which have the same engine. It's a little bit of a different styling of bike, but they do carry the same engines, but they didn't have an electric start. They didn't have disc brakes. And it had the 2-in-1 exhaust. I ended up picking up one of the bikes that was almost complete except for a front wheel. The other one was just so trashed, it basically went for scrap. So I got that to sort of help me with some of the missing parts and maybe go with some of the styling designs like the 2-in-1 exhaust. Engine is there, it does turn over. Haven't done any compression testing or anything, but as far as I know, there's no big knocks, but ultimately we won't know until it's started. These didn't come with the bike. These are completely rebuilt that came from a dude. I think he had a bike shop or used to do restorations. These have not seen fuel. They're clean as clean can be. Every part of them has been gone through. I believe they've been rejetted because there was original jetting, idling, running problems with the engine itself, and there was some things you could do to remedy that. So I've been told. I put them on the bike just because I didn't want exposed inlets on the engine. So when I got the carbs, I literally attached them and then put a couple of pods on there just to close off the system from any unwanted intruders. These were sealed. There was little baggies. I do have some of the parts. They came with the shims and the mounting collars. So those were on there with plastic bags in on the front. Could have done the same on the back, but because I got the carbs, I figured I'd just throw it all in together. This is as much of the seat, and there was no airbox, that was gone. The electronics, we'll talk about that in a minute. That's a whole other bowl of spaghetti that we'll have to deal with. All the seat mounting stuff and seat locking, helmet holder stuff is all there. It's actually solid enough. It's rusty up here, but it's solid enough back there that it might be able to be used. If it wasn't purchased here, it was definitely serviced here early in its life, and that's about as much history as I'm gonna find. Wheels and tires, pretty much a stock. The back one's quite rusty. The spokes are quite rusty. The rim is okay. The front one looks in amazingly better shape. I have a feeling that he might have been polishing up the front spokes a little bit. Let's take a look at the other side. Okay, so actually while I'm here, I can show you the dent in the tank. It's not terrible. It can definitely be squeezed out, but not savable unless I want to really run vintage look, but I think it's going to get some paint, and so enough that I'll try and push some of this out, but if I have to do some Bondo, I will. Front forks are okay. Once again, I don't know if he had them off and cleaned them up or whatever. The boots look okay. There's a little bit of rings being left on the tubes themselves. So yeah, and I can actually see this fork. There's some cracking going on there. So definitely front forks are gonna need a rebuild. Like I said, engine's gonna get it going over. We'll talk about some of what I've looked at since I've added in here. A little bit has to be done with this. I've got a crack on the top triple clamp right there. Luckily, my parts bike has one, which is in pretty good shape. Let me get the tank off, and then I'll start to show you some of what I've been sort of dealing with wiring wise. Okay, so before I started filming and I brought this bike in, I kind of just wanted to get familiarized with the wiring that was there. The harness was here, but what had happened was the whole thing had been offset and pulled back maybe a foot, and I don't know if he had done that or whatever, so I couldn't get anything to match. I could, like, you know, the yellow and blue coming out of the coil weren't going anywhere. Obviously they were hitting the engine plug for the points, but they weren't getting into the harness anywhere. And then, you know, troubleshooting, like trying to figure out where the stop switch, you know, the engine kill switch on the handlebars had like a black wire with a white stripe, and, you know, would come down here to kill the charge to the coils. I couldn't find the other end of it. Everything had been shoved down so that all the wiring in the harness that should have been here was down here, which you'd think was very obvious, but when there was only just one or two plugs and they were kind of in, you know, buried in and out of the way, it had me completely perplexed. So the first thing I sort of had to do was just get basically where things were supposed to go. Then my focus turned into what is missing on this harness in order for me to get basic power to everything, and ideally check for spark. You know, a lot of this stuff is kind of easy to find, plug and play stuff. You know, regulator, rectifier, there's the rear brake switch. That's the harness for the rear that goes to the tail light and the signals. The one thing that was missing from this whole setup, and that I wasn't able to get from the CJ parts bike either, was the starter solenoid. This is actually the starter solenoid that came from the motor, the 450 SC motor I bought for my other project. I mentioned there that I got a wiring harness with it. This is the solenoid that came with that bike, as well as the actual wire that went to the starter on the bike. That is from the 450 as well. The one thing that ultimately slipped me up is because the whole thing kind of seemed a little plug and play. On the starter button for this bike on this harness, the two wires that actually run off the button are these two. Green with the red stripe, yellow with the red stripe. And what's funny is that they exactly match the solenoid wiring for the Nighthawk. And the plugs are the right gender the right way. So the two exactly plug and play into each other, which I thought was great. You know, hook it up, push the button, Bob's your uncle. What's funny though is if you start thinking about the wiring for this, you know, one side of this needs to be grounded, and the other side of this needs to have the energy to fire the switch. So really and truly, if you just take these two wires and go directly up to the starter switch, there is no ground introduced and there is no 12 volt introduced. It's just basically putting, you know, touching these two wires together without any voltage to go through them. So seems obvious to me now, but at the time it was just like, you know, plug them in, they're all the same color. So what I have to do to make this function is ground out this dude and send a battery signal up one side of this from the battery positive, and then the other side comes back through that. So basically this gets interrupted, that goes to ground, that gets a hot in, switch closes, and then it can operate my starter. That's the two wires, right, that go up to my starter button, which brings me to the second problem, is that my starter button ceases to exist. I do have the bottom half of this case. There is no button. All the wiring is gone, and this was broken anyway. So I have to come up with a better solution in the meantime for doing that. So that was a brief explanation of one of the things I was missing and how I'm sort of working around it on this harness. The rest of everything here seems to plug and play. You know, regulator, rectifier, any of that stuff has not been tested. Right now it's just figuring out what goes where. So these points I actually grabbed off the CJ360 engine. And the reason I did that was, and it's hard to explain, these are the original points here. These guys, the spring on this one, it just, like, when you pull it, it's like, it pulls back, but it pulls back really feebly. And when it was mounted on the bike, it wasn't even touching. So it's like I'd have to squeeze them to get continuity. And it's actually, I don't think it's a wear thing, because it's like there's all kinds of, meat on the bone there in terms of the metal touching. It just doesn't have any of that pullback. Now if I go to the other side on the same ones, you can just tell they're just tighter and stronger, and so I think the spring got fatigued for whatever else, because the points themselves aren't worn terribly. But I did pull that set off my other engine sort of to just see, and as soon as I did it, continuity was fine and worked out, so I did change those. Okay, so I'm gonna stop myself there. I wanted this video to be sort of the overview and intro and kind of the collectively overall assembly of what's on the bike and what's not on the bike, and I found myself starting to go down the rabbit hole of the electronics mess, and I'd really like to have that be its own sort of focused thing. And I also sort of wanted to touch base on my plans for this bike. So it's going to be a scrambler. It's going to get some slightly fatter knobby tires, something different exhaust wise, couple different options that I'm going over right now. I'm probably need new shocks in the back, so I'm probably going to get slightly higher ones anyway. Yeah, and then the seat and the electronics and everything else. So that's the direction I want to go. Tank will get painted, probably not something very stock. And then there's obviously the whole getting it run thing, which I'm hoping will be the next episode. If I can continue sort of my trek through the electronics, I'm going to get into the points, test the starter, see if all that's good, and maybe, we can see this thing kind of come to life. So, yeah. If you're digging this, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, share this video with someone you think may enjoy this series or the Honda 400 series or the Trail 90, which still isn't done yet. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up, get this one out, and dig right back into the electronics. So I think we're gonna have another episode, hopefully just in the next couple of days. And yeah, and it would be nice if I could get a better rhythm like that going. Once a week is sort of the goal, but if I can get 2 out a week, I'm gonna do that. There's a whole bucket load of parts that some are on order, some I've received, some I have yet to order. And with that, that'll slow or speed up my progress. Anyway, like I said, like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, and we will talk to you next time, guys. Cheers.